In the dark midnight, the sky over Haifa, Israel, which was usually calm, suddenly transformed into a battlefield. A bright, blinding flash, as if tearing through the night, foreshadowed a catastrophe. Iran, a country that had long posed a serious threat to Israel, finally launched deadly cluster missiles. These missiles, designed with advanced technology, managed to breach the air defense system Israel had always relied on. For years, the Iron Dome had been renowned as an effective means of protecting Israel from enemy missiles, including the simple rockets typically launched by armed groups. However, this time, Israel's defensive technologies faced a far more severe challenge. The Iron Dome proved powerless against this unexpected strike. The attack was swift, like a sudden storm. The Iron Dome, which could normally intercept missiles one by one, struggled desperately to manage the situation, but this time Israel's defense system could do nothing. The Iranian missiles carried multiple submunitions that went undetected by a system designed to intercept only a single missile at a time. With each explosion, the submunitions detached and fell in different locations, far from the initial impact site. The Iron Dome, capable of tracking and shooting down only one target at a time, could not handle hundreds of submunitions scattered across the territory with each attack. This attack was more sophisticated, complex, and deadly compared to previous ones, which could be managed by existing defense systems. According to reports from Israeli security services, a single Iranian cluster missile could split into dozens of smaller submunitions that dispersed toward various strategic points in Haifa. The primary targets of the attack were not only government buildings, but also densely populated residential areas surrounding the city center. The submunitions landed in different places, causing explosions that destroyed buildings, damaged cars parked on the streets, and other critical infrastructure. Residents in the surrounding areas had no time to escape and were gripped by panic that engulfed this usually peaceful city. The attack not only demolished infrastructure, but also instilled deep fear in the hearts of the inhabitants. The first explosion that shook Haifa resounded like a deafening thunderclap. Sleeping residents awoke in terror. Powerful underground tremors drove many to flee their homes in search of shelter. It was not only the explosions that roused them, but also the sirens that wailed incessantly throughout the night, signaling imminent danger. On the streets, the situation was worsened by the noise of stalled or trapped cars amid the panic. Meanwhile, in the air, Israeli defense forces attempted to intercept the falling submunitions, but their success was severely limited. Haifa, which had always been a symbol of tranquility in Israel, turned into a city engulfed in destruction and chaos. Government buildings, the primary targets of Iran's attack, were obliterated in an instant. Majestic structures, typically centers for critical national decision-making, were reduced to charred ruins. What was once a symbol of strength and stability in Israel now stands as a horrifying memory. Employees inside the buildings had no chance to escape. They were trapped in a massive explosion that allowed no time for evacuation or rescue. As flames devoured the remains of the structures, rescuers attempting to reach the victims were blocked by debris and rubble covering the entire area. The atmosphere in Haifa grew increasingly grim, and no one knowing how many lives were lost in this rapid and devastating assault. The destruction left by Iran's missile strike on Haifa were immense. On the city's main streets, cars burned, sending black smoke billowing into the night sky. Debris from demolished buildings covered nearly every corner, blocking major roadways and complicating evacuation efforts. Office buildings, usually occupied by senior officials, turned into a sea of fire and dust. Continuous explosions exacerbated the chaos. Residents caught in the city center fled in search of shelter, while others could not escape the disorder. No one could say for certain how many lives were claimed by this brutal assault. Even among the scattered debris, most victims had yet to be found. The city of Haifa, once known as one of Israel's most important cities, became a symbol of profound devastation. Israel's Minister of Defense immediately convened an emergency meeting in response to the worsening situation. Tension was palpable on the faces of all attending officials. Mobile phones and radios buzzed incessantly, relaying the latest updates from various Haifa districts hit by the strikes. "We've lost so much in such a short time," one senior official said in a worried tone. "Iran has demonstrated far more advanced military capabilities than we anticipated." In the meeting room, officials swiftly and decisively discussed necessary response measures. However, despite the urgency of the session, none had a clear answer to the question, how do we stop the ongoing attacks? Israel's air and ground forces were mobilized, but amidst destroyed infrastructure and an overwhelmed defense system, the situation grew increasingly critical. Sources within the Israeli government reported that the Iron Dome, the air defense system that had become a symbol of Israel's strength, failed to contain the Iranian missile strike. The Iron Dome was designed to counter conventional missiles launched one at a time. However, this time, Iran's attack was far more complex. The launched missiles, equipped with cluster warheads, carried numerous submunitions that dispersed rapidly, rendering Israel's defense system unable to intercept all the missiles. Even when the Iron Dome managed to intercept some of the main missiles, many submunitions still fell to the ground, destroying various buildings and causing further damage. We're facing a threat that our current systems cannot handle, an Israeli military expert stated. The Iron Dome can engage only one missile at a time. Scattered submunitions render it useless in this attack. The Iron Dome, renowned for its ability to intercept high-speed missiles, was designed to counter threats from simpler, conventional rockets. However, Iran's cluster missile technology poses a far more complex challenge. Due to submunitions that can spread over vast distances, each attack becomes harder to repel. Every cluster missile launched by Iran does not strike a single target, but can inflict damage across multiple districts simultaneously. The submunitions falling in different locations make Israel's defense ineffective at preventing large-scale destruction. On the ground, Israeli forces struggle to restore their air defense, but the damage inflicted exceeded all expectations. The country now must acknowledge that Iran's threat is more dangerous and organized than ever imagined. Iran's missile strikes on Haifa continue with even greater intensity. In less than an hour, more cluster missiles rained down on Israel's strategic districts, with no signs of the attack ceasing soon. Missile strike warnings blared again, amplifying panic across Israel. Residents who had earlier sought refuge in basements and shelters felt mounting tension. Every second grew heavier. In military headquarters, Israeli leaders began preparing response measures, but with destroyed infrastructure and limited weapon reserves, they felt increasingly cornered. A population that was once calm now had to come to terms with the fact that the attack might last longer than expected, with consequences far graver than they could have imagined. The disaster that struck Haifa rapidly worsened. Tension in Israel escalated as even more alarming reports began circulating among military and intelligence officials. According to sources linked to Israeli intelligence, Iran is reportedly preparing to launch additional cluster missiles in the coming hours. This news sparked significant concern, as previous attacks caused severe destruction, and the next ones are expected to be even more devastating. Israeli military officials now must admit that, despite efforts to bolster the air defense system, Iran appears to possess a more advanced strategy and more sophisticated attack capabilities. In an emergency meeting held late at night, Israeli leaders firmly declared the need for urgent measures to mitigate the consequences of new strikes. However, fears persist that the defense system may not withstand the next blows. The damage caused by this attack is already immense, and despite ongoing rescue efforts, material losses are evident. Haifa's core infrastructure, including government centers, transportation facilities, and numerous other critical buildings, has been completely destroyed. Administrative hubs, once the backbone of the state, are now piles of rubble. Buildings that once symbolized governmental strength are now consumed by fire and dust. Meanwhile, the transportation network linking Haifa to other cities is also severely damaged, triggering panic among residents attempting to flee the city. Rescuers mobilized to aid the affected struggle to navigate through debris scattered across the city. Time is running out, and surviving officials frantically try to issue emergency orders and organize evacuations. The situation in Israel grows increasingly dire. In a statement released by the Israeli military, they reported a shortage of weapons and equipment to repel Iran's ongoing missile strikes. The Iron Dome, until now a symbol of the nation's defense, cannot counter such complex attacks. With relentless and intensifying strikes, Israel's armed forces are currently in a state of emergency. Ground, air, and naval forces have been mobilized to repel potential new attacks, But with destroyed infrastructure and an overburdened defense system, the situation continues to deteriorate. Military officials stated that, while Israeli troops are on high alert, they cannot guarantee how long the country can hold out without international allies' support. Amid this chaos, the psychological toll on Israelis is increasingly felt. Families who lost loved ones in the attacks gather in the streets, weeping and mourning in profound grief. Many are mired in feelings of loss and uncertainty. Surviving officials strive to find a way to respond to this extraordinary blow, but the fact that the Iron Dome can no longer halt further attacks leaves them bewildered. Desperation is evident on their faces, and despite efforts to find a solution, Israel's military might is now constrained by the realization that these attacks are far more massive and organized than anticipated. Plans for a more aggressive counterstrike are under consideration, but the situation is evolving so rapidly that everything seems increasingly uncontrollable. News of the missile strikes that rocked Haifa quickly spread worldwide, sparking significant international concern. Israel's allies promptly expressed solidarity, condemning Iran's aggressive actions. However, despite condemnation from many nations, some began to fear that the conflict could escalate into a broader one, potentially spreading to other Middle Eastern regions. International tension heightened as some countries warned of the possibility of a more severe military escalation. The UN is expected to convene an emergency meeting soon to discuss measures to de-escalate tensions. However, with Iran's threat becoming increasingly real, many doubt that diplomatic efforts can halt a conflict already ignited in Haifa. Israel finds itself in a precarious situation that will shape the conflict's trajectory in the coming hours. Israeli leaders face a difficult choice: launch a more powerful military strike against Iran, which could lead to full-scale war, or find a way to stop further attacks without exacerbating the situation. Many in Israel fear that a stronger counterstrike will only heighten tensions and widen the cycle of violence in the Middle East. However, with a persistent and worsening threat, some military leaders call for immediate, decisive action. The international community anxiously awaits the decision Israel's government will make. Will they pursue escalation or seek a diplomatic path to alleviate the extreme tension? Meanwhile, Iran shows no signs of backing down. Iran has repeatedly issued stern warnings to Israel about the consequences of its actions in the Middle East, particularly regarding its role in conflicts with armed groups in Syria and Lebanon. The missile strikes on Haifa are merely part of a broader effort expected to continue until Israel's military and political infrastructure is completely dismantled. The Iranian government has stated it will persist with strikes unless Israel immediately ceases its interference in areas Iran considers part of its national interests. In other words, these attacks are not a one-off action, but part of a longer-term strategic calculation between the two nations. Government buildings, until now symbols of Israel's strength, have been reduced to piles of rubble. The cluster missile strike that destroyed governmental centers inflicted not only physical damage, but also a far more severe psychological blow. Israeli society must grapple with the reality that such a massive and organized attack has obliterated decision-making hubs. Citizens who once felt secure in their country now experience profound anxiety. Surviving officials wrestle with the aftermath of destruction, attempting to restore order amid the chaos in the governance system. Israel now must contend not only with ongoing strikes, but also with preserving political and moral stability amid a growing threat. With each new attack, tensions escalate. The international community wonders whether these strikes will lead to a large-scale war involving more Middle Eastern nations. Many countries are growing concerned about the consequences of this escalation, especially those with strategic interests in the region. Will this be a turning point leading to a full-scale war, or can Israel manage the situation without drawing in other nations? The international community is increasingly worried, given the fragile stability in the Middle East that has persisted for so long. Amid this uncertainty, Israel strives to rebuild what has been destroyed. However, the path to recovery seems long and fraught with serious challenges. The world currently watches the conflict's development with anxiety, tracking its every move. Can Israel withstand the relentless attacks, or will they lead to a much broader conflict? One thing is certain: Haifa, once known as a peaceful and thriving port city, has now become a symbol of an emergency threatening not only Israel but the entire world. The city, once vibrant with life and activity, has transformed into a war zone filled with destruction and uncertainty. Each passing second brings us closer to a new phase of the conflict that could reshape the region's political and military landscape. All eyes are now on Israel, hoping to see if it can find a way to endure or if the world will plunge into an even larger conflict.